Admiral Kim Tae-ho rubbed his tired eyes as he stood in Earth's primary defense command center, watching the endless stream of data flowing across the massive holographic displays. The blue and white marble of Earth rotated slowly beneath him, beautiful and serene, while thousands of satellites and defense platforms orbited silently in the darkness of space. It looked so peaceful from up here, he thought. The people down there had no idea what was really happening in the vast emptiness beyond their world. Kim had been in charge of Earth's orbital defenses for 3 years now, ever since the government decided that humanity needed to start taking space security seriously. Most people thought he was just protecting against asteroids and space debris, but Kim knew better. Deep down, he had always suspected they weren't alone in the universe. What he didn't know was that his suspicions were absolutely correct, and that alien eyes had been watching humanity for much longer than anyone could imagine. Far beyond the orbit of Neptune, where human telescopes could barely detect anything, sleek alien observation posts drifted in the cold darkness. These stations had been there for decades, carefully hidden and constantly monitoring every radio signal, every satellite launch, and every technological breakthrough that happened on Earth. The beings inside these stations looked nothing like humans. They had multiple arms, compound eyes, and bodies that seemed more insect than mammal, but their intelligence was sharp, and their mission was clear: watch the humans and report everything back to their masters. On the other side of the galaxy, impossibly far from Earth, towering crystal spires reached toward alien stars. These beautiful but cold structures housed the Galactic Council, a group of ancient alien races that had been controlling galactic politics for thousands of years. The council chambers were vast and echoing, filled with beings from dozens of different worlds, all gathered to discuss the fate of countless civilizations across the galaxy. Councillor Vextar, a tall creature with skin like polished metal and eyes that glowed with an inner light, held a datapad in his long fingers as he reviewed the latest intelligence reports. His voice carried clearly across the chamber as he read from the document that would change everything. The report was about Earth, though the aliens didn't call it by that name. To them, it was just another primitive world in a remote corner of the galaxy labeled Terra 3 in their vast databases of monitored planets. But this particular primitive world was causing them problems. The insectoid observer, who had spent decades watching humanity, stepped forward to give his briefing. His multiple eyes focused on the council members as he spoke in a voice that buzzed and clicked. He explained how human technology was advancing at a rate that made the council nervous. Humans had cracked the secrets of nuclear fusion, turning the power of stars into energy for their cities. They were building quantum computers that could solve problems in seconds that would take other civilizations years to figure out. Most concerning of all, they were starting to look seriously at the stars, building ships and planning missions that would take them far from their home world. Elder Mordin, the oldest and most powerful member of the council, listened to the report with growing irritation. He was ancient even by galactic standards, having lived through the rise and fall of entire civilizations. His species had been among the founders of the Galactic Council, and he had little patience for what he saw as minor problems. When the observer finished his report, Mordin's response was swift and dismissive. The elder made it clear that humanity's technological progress didn't matter to him. In his view, they were still primitive creatures who barely understood their own solar system, let alone the vast complexities of galactic politics. What really worried him was the Vorthak Empire, a military power that had been growing stronger and bolder with each passing year. The Vorthak were ruthless conquerors who showed no mercy to the worlds they invaded, and they were starting to threaten the careful balance of power that the Council had maintained for millennia. But while the Council debated and planned in their crystal towers, completely unaware that their dismissive attitude toward humanity would soon prove to be a terrible mistake, something important was happening back in Earth's solar system. Captain Lee Minho, a brave and skilled pilot, was making final preparations for humanity's most ambitious space mission ever attempted. Lee stood in the cockpit of the exploration vessel Horizon's Edge, running through pre-flight checks as his ship prepared to leave Earth's solar system for the first time in human history. The ship was humanity's masterpiece of engineering, equipped with the most advanced technology their civilization could produce. Lee's mission was simple in concept, but revolutionary in scope. Travel to the Alpha Centauri system and search for signs of life or habitable worlds. What Lee didn't know, what none of the humans knew, was that the alien watchers had been deliberately interfering with humanity's development for decades. Every time human scientists got close to making contact with alien civilizations, every time their radio telescopes picked up signals that might indicate intelligent life, the watchers made sure those discoveries were suppressed or dismissed as natural phenomena. The aliens had decided long ago that humanity was too dangerous to be allowed into galactic civilization. They had studied human history and seen the wars, the violence and the aggressive expansion that seemed to be part of human nature. In their view, humans were a species that would cause nothing but trouble if they ever learned about the greater galaxy around them. As Lee's ship began its journey toward the stars, carrying humanity's hopes and dreams of making contact with other intelligent life, the alien observers watched and prepared to intervene once again. They had no idea that this time their interference would lead to consequences that would shake the entire galaxy and change the course of cosmic history forever. Lieutenant Park Ji-woo had been staring at the same screen for 12 hours straight, her eyes burning from the constant glow of the monitoring station. She was the lead communications officer for the Pioneer 7 mission, humanity's boldest attempt to reach beyond their own solar system. The probe had been traveling for months now, sending back data as it journeyed toward the Alpha Centauri system, and Park had been tracking every signal, every piece of information it transmitted back to Earth. The probe itself was a marvel of human engineering, packed with the most advanced sensors and communication equipment that Earth scientists could build. It was designed to search for planets that might support human life, to scan for water, oxygen, and other signs that humanity might not be alone in the universe. For Park, this mission represented everything she had dreamed of since becoming an officer in Earth's space program. But something was wrong. Park frowned as she watched the data streaming across her screen, noticing patterns that didn't make sense. The probe's signals were becoming distorted, filled with strange interference that seemed to come from nowhere. She had been monitoring space communications for years, and she knew the difference between natural cosmic radiation and something else entirely. She grabbed her headset and opened a direct channel to mission control back on Earth. Her voice was steady, but concerned. As she reported what she was seeing, the interference was getting stronger, and now she was detecting something that made her heart race with excitement and fear. There were objects out there, moving in patterns that defied natural explanation. These weren't asteroids or comets, drifting through space. These were structured, organized, and they were closing in on the Pioneer 7 probe. Unknown to Park and the rest of humanity, their little probe had crossed into territory claimed by one of the galaxy's most feared military powers. The Vorthak Empire had been expanding aggressively for centuries, conquering world after world with ruthless efficiency. They were a warrior race that valued strength above all else, and they had built their civilization on the bones of countless other species they had destroyed or enslaved. The Vorthak patrol cruiser Death's Edge was a sleek, deadly vessel designed for one purpose: to hunt down and destroy anything that dared to enter Vorthak space without permission. Its hull was black as the void between stars, covered in weapon systems that could turn a planet's surface into molten glass. The ship's commander, Zulmoth, was a veteran of dozens of conquest campaigns, a being who had earned his rank through brutality and cunning. When the Death's Edge intercepted the human probe, Zulmoth examined it with the same contempt he might show for an insect that had wandered into his path. The device was primitive by Vorthak standards, built with technology that his people had surpassed centuries ago. But what interested him wasn't the probe itself, but what it represented. Somewhere out there was a world full of beings who had dared to send their technology into his empire's territory. Zulmoth's orders to his crew were simple and direct. They would trace the probe's origin and teach whatever civilization had built it a lesson about respecting Vorthak authority. In his experience, primitive worlds usually surrendered after a small demonstration of superior firepower. If they didn't surrender, well, that just meant more practice for his gunners. The Vorthak scout fleet that arrived at Earth's outer solar system was small by their standards, just a handful of ships sent to intimidate what they assumed would be a helpless, primitive civilization. They had done this countless times before, with other worlds, and they expected the same result: immediate surrender followed by either tribute payments or total conquest. But the Vorthak had made a terrible mistake. They had underestimated humanity's paranoia, their tendency to prepare for the worst possible scenarios, and their absolute refusal to back down when threatened. Admiral Kim's orbital defense platforms had been built specifically to deal with unknown threats from space, and Captain Choi Seung-ho's rapid response fleet was crewed by men and women who had trained their entire careers for exactly this moment. When the alien ships appeared on Earth's sensors, Choi didn't hesitate. His transmission was clear and direct, giving the unknown vessels one chance to withdraw peacefully. The Vorthak response was exactly what their culture demanded: immediate attack against what they saw as an inferior opponent. What followed was 10 minutes of the most intense space combat in human history. The Vorthak expected their superior technology and experience to carry the day, but they hadn't counted on human desperation and ingenuity. Earth's defenders fought like cornered animals, using tactics that the aliens had never encountered before. They rammed damaged ships into enemy vessels, detonated their own reactors to take out alien ships, and coordinated attacks with a precision that stunned their opponents. When the battle ended, the vacuum of space was filled with the burning wreckage of the Vorthak scout fleet. Not a single alien ship survived to report back to their empire, but in their final moments, the dying ships had transmitted Earth's location across the galaxy, ensuring that what had just happened would not go unnoticed. The first blood had been drawn and humanity had won, but they had also announced their presence to a galaxy that was about to learn just how dangerous these supposedly primitive beings could be. Dr. Yoon Hye-jin had never seen anything like the alien wreckage floating in Earth's orbital space. As the head of the hastily assembled xenobiology team, she was the first human to get up close and personal with technology from another world. The twisted metal and strange crystalline components scattered across the debris field told a story that both amazed and terrified her. Working in a specially modified spacesuit, Yoon carefully collected samples from the destroyed alien ships. Every piece of technology she examined was far beyond anything humanity had ever created. The hull materials were stronger than anything in Earth's periodic table. The energy conduits could carry power loads that would melt human equipment, and the computer systems were so advanced that her team couldn't even figure out how to turn them on. But despite their technological superiority, these aliens were dead, and humanity was still alive. That fact puzzled Yoon more than any of the advanced technology she was studying. How had Earth's defenders managed to destroy ships that were centuries ahead of human engineering? The answer, she realized, wasn't in the technology itself, but in how the aliens had used it. Back in the secure research facility on Earth, Yoon spent weeks analyzing battle recordings and wreckage patterns. What she discovered was both encouraging and deeply concerning. The aliens had fought with rigid, predictable tactics that suggested they were used to fighting opponents who would surrender quickly when faced with superior force. Their ships were arranged in formal battle lines, they had attacked from obvious approach vectors, and they had clearly expected humanity to give up after the first exchange of fire. When Yoon presented her findings to the emergency session of Earth's military leadership, her report sent chills through the room. These aliens had advanced technology, but they had grown soft and overconfident from centuries of easy victories. They fought like bullies who had never encountered real resistance. The scary part was that if these were just scouts from a larger empire, humanity might have won the battle, but could still lose the war. 3 months after the battle, Earth's long-range sensors detected another alien ship approaching the solar system. This one was different from the warships they had destroyed. It was larger, more ornate, and it was broadcasting what appeared to be diplomatic signals rather than weapons targeting data. President Seo Joon-ki made the decision to allow the ship to approach Earth, but under heavy guard, and with every defense system ready to fire. The meeting took place in the renovated United Nations building in New York, in the same chamber where humanity had once tried to solve its own problems through diplomacy, rather than war. The alien ambassador that emerged from the diplomatic vessel was unlike anything humans had imagined. It looked like a giant squid that had learned to walk upright, with dozens of writhing tentacles and eyes that seemed to look in multiple directions at once. The ambassador didn't speak human languages, but it carried a translation device that converted its alien thoughts into words that humans could understand. When it began to speak, its message was delivered with the kind of casual arrogance that comes from centuries of unchallenged authority. The alien introduced itself as a representative of something called the Galactic Council, a government that apparently controlled most of the known galaxy. It referred to humanity as a primitive species from a world it called Terra 3, as if humans were too unimportant to deserve their actual name. The message was clear and insulting. Humanity would submit to alien authority and accept supervision, because they were too aggressive and dangerous to be allowed to govern themselves. General Han So-young, who had been standing quietly behind President Seo during the alien's speech, couldn't contain herself any longer. She stepped forward with the kind of controlled anger that comes from a lifetime of military service. Her response was simple and direct. Humans didn't submit to anyone, and they certainly wouldn't start now with aliens who couldn't even be bothered to learn their proper name. The ambassador's tentacles moved in what the translation device interpreted as amusement. It reminded the humans that they had only destroyed a single patrol, while the Vorthak Empire commanded 10,000 worlds across the galaxy. The implication was clear. Humanity had won one small battle, but they were facing an enemy that controlled a significant portion of the galaxy. They needed the Council's protection and guidance to survive. President Seo listened to this threat with the calm expression of a man who had spent his entire political career dealing with bullies and intimidation tactics. His response was delivered in the same quiet, steady tone he had used in countless diplomatic negotiations, but his words carried the weight of humanity's collective determination. He told the alien ambassador that if the Vorthak Empire wanted a fight, humanity would give them one. If they controlled 10,000 worlds, then humanity would find a way to destroy 10,000 worlds. The meeting was over. As the alien ship departed Earth's solar system, carrying news of humanity's defiance back to the Galactic Council, neither side fully understood what they had just set in motion. The Council had expected easy submission from a primitive species. Instead, they had just declared war on a race that had never learned how to surrender. Fleet Admiral Park Dong-hyun stood on the bridge of Earth's flagship, watching the impossible sight unfold before him through the massive view screen. The space around Earth was suddenly filled with alien warships, more than he had ever imagined could exist in one place. The Vorthak Armada had arrived like a swarm of deadly insects, their dark hulls blotting out the stars as they took position around humanity's homeworld. Park had been preparing for this moment ever since the first alien attack 3 months ago. He knew that destroying the Vorthak scouts had been like kicking a hornet's nest, and that retaliation would come eventually. But seeing over 300 enemy vessels arranged in perfect battle formation around Earth still took his breath away. Each of those ships was larger and more advanced than anything humanity had ever built, and together they carried enough firepower to turn Earth's surface into molten rock. The Admiral had spent his entire career in space, working his way up from a young pilot to commander of Earth's entire defensive fleet. He had fought in the resource wars around the asteroid belt, commanded rescue missions to the outer planets, and trained countless officers in the art of space combat. But nothing in his experience had prepared him for this moment, when the survival of his entire species depended on the decisions he made in the next few minutes. Captain Nam Yu-jin, commanding the heavy cruiser Soul's Vengeance, was one of Park's most trusted officers. She had proven herself in dozens of smaller engagements, and her ship was one of the newest and most powerful vessels in Earth's fleet. When she reported that the alien fleet was demanding humanity's surrender, her voice was steady, despite the overwhelming odds they faced. The Vorthak message was transmitted in broken human languages, clearly intended to humiliate Earth's defenders before the final battle began. They offered humanity one last chance to surrender, and accept slavery rather than face complete annihilation. The alien commander's voice dripped with contempt as he described what would happen to Earth's population if they chose to resist. Park's response was immediate and final. He had no intention of surrendering his world to alien invaders, no matter how powerful they might be. His order to the fleet was simple and direct. All ships were free to engage the enemy with every weapon they possessed. It was time to show these aliens what happened when they threatened humanity's home. The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. The Vorthak expected their overwhelming numerical advantage and superior technology to end the fight quickly, just as it had in countless previous conquests. They arranged their ships in the traditional battle formations that had served them well for centuries, with heavy cruisers in the center and smaller vessels protecting the flanks. But humanity didn't fight like the other species the Vorthak had. Conquered, human captains threw away the rulebook of civilized warfare and fought with a desperation and creativity that shocked their enemies. When Commander Ominseo's ship took critical damage and began to lose power, she didn't retreat or surrender. Instead, she ordered her crew to ram the disabled vessel directly into the center of the enemy formation, detonating her ship's reactor and taking out 3 Vorthak cruisers in the resulting explosion. Lieutenant Colonel Baek Yo-jin led one of the most audacious operations of the entire battle. When his ship managed to get close enough to an enemy vessel, he ordered his Marines to board the alien ship and fight their way to the bridge. The hand-to-hand combat that followed was brutal and merciless, with human soldiers fighting through corridors filled with hostile aliens who had never faced such aggressive boarding tactics. Throughout the 6-hour battle, human ships coordinated their attacks with a precision that came from years of training together. They used their smaller size and greater maneuverability to dart between the larger alien vessels, striking at weak points and then disappearing before the enemy could respond. When their weapons ran out of ammunition, they used their ships as weapons, ramming enemy vessels or detonating their own reactors to cause maximum damage. The Vorthak had never encountered an enemy that refused to surrender when faced with hopeless odds. They had never fought opponents who would sacrifice their own lives just to take down a few more enemy ships. As the battle continued, their formation began to break apart under the relentless human assault, and individual ships started trying to escape rather than continue the fight. When the shooting finally stopped, the space around Earth looked like a graveyard. Debris from nearly 300 destroyed Vorthak warships drifted in slowly expanding clouds, testament to the price of underestimating human determination. Not a single alien vessel had managed to escape the battle, which meant that no one would return to the Vorthak Empire with news of what had happened. But the victory came at a terrible cost. Earth's fleet had been devastated, with more than half of their ships destroyed or damaged beyond repair. Thousands of human sailors and Marines had given their lives to protect their home world. Yet somehow, impossibly, they had won. The news of humanity's victory spread across the galaxy faster than anyone thought possible, carried by the secret communication networks of enslaved species who had been watching the battle from hidden observation posts. For the first time in centuries, the Vorthak Empire had been dealt a crushing defeat, and the galaxy began to whisper about the mysterious warriors from the small blue world who refused to surrender. On the distant mining world of Kepler 442b, a planet where the twin suns never seemed to set and the air tasted of metal and despair, a Zalani worker named Trixala clutched a hidden communication device with hands that shook from more than just exhaustion. The Zalani had been slaves of the Vorthak Empire for over 200 years, forced to dig precious metals from the poisonous depths of their own world, while their masters grew rich from their suffering. Trixala had risked his life to build the secret receiver, using scraps of discarded Vorthak technology and components smuggled from the orbital stations above. For months, he and other resistance members had been monitoring military communications, hoping to learn something that might help their people survive another day under alien rule. What he heard that morning changed everything. The transmission was fragmentary and coded, but the message was clear enough to make Trixala's heart race with an emotion he had almost forgotten: hope. Somewhere in the galaxy, a species called humans had destroyed an entire Vorthak battle fleet, not just defeated them or driven them away, but completely annihilated over 300 warships without allowing a single enemy vessel to escape. Master. Foreman Krylos, the Vorthak overseer who had ruled this mining operation with brutal efficiency for 30 years, had always seemed invincible to the enslaved workers. He was massive even by Vorthak standards, with scars covering his armored hide from dozens of conquest campaigns. The Zilani had learned to read his moods from the way he moved, and for the first time in living memory, Krylos moved like a creature that had discovered it wasn't the apex predator after all. The news spread through the slave quarters in whispers and hidden glances. Workers who had spent their entire lives without hope began to believe that perhaps their oppressors weren't as invincible as they claimed. Across the galaxy, on hundreds of worlds where different species lived under Vorthak rule, similar conversations were taking place in mining tunnels, factory floors, and prison camps. Back on Earth, Captain Song Mi-young found herself in the unexpected position of becoming humanity's first director of alien affairs. She had been a communications officer before the war began, specializing in analyzing enemy transmissions and signals intelligence. Now she spent her days sorting through dozens of secret messages that arrived daily from species across the galaxy, each one offering help to the humans who had accomplished the impossible. Song worked from a hastily converted conference room in the Pentagon, surrounded by translation equipment and star charts that showed regions of space humanity had never even known existed. Each message she decoded revealed more about the true scope of Vorthak oppression and the desperate hope that human victories had sparked throughout the galaxy. The Rigelians, who had once been master navigators before their conquest, offered detailed star charts showing every Vorthak supply route and military installation within 50 light-years of their home system. The survivors from the Centauri colonies, refugees who had escaped when their worlds fell to Vorthak invasion fleets, provided tactical intelligence about enemy ship designs and battle formations that had been gathered through years of careful observation. Even species that Song had never heard of sent offers of assistance. The crystalline beings from the Vega system offered to share their advanced sensor technology. The nomadic traders of the Outer Rim promised to carry human messages to resistance cells on occupied worlds. Each transmission represented years or even decades of carefully hidden hope, now finally finding an outlet through humanity's unexpected success. Director Kim Hai-won of Earth's Research Division had been working around the clock since the battle ended, leading teams of scientists and engineers in the most important reverse engineering project in human history. The wreckage of the Vorthak fleet contained technology that was centuries ahead of Earth's capabilities, and Kim was determined to unlock its secrets before the next alien attack arrived. The breakthrough came when Kim's team finally figured out how the Vorthak hyperspace drives functioned. The technology was incredibly complex, but human engineers had always excelled at taking apart advanced systems and building improved versions. Within weeks, they had not only duplicated the alien drives, but had found ways to make them faster and more efficient than the originals. Kim's report to the War Cabinet was brief but revolutionary. Earth's first interstellar fleet would be ready for deployment within a month, equipped with ships that could travel between star systems in days rather than years. For the first time in human history, they would be able to take the fight directly to their enemies rather than waiting for attacks to come to them. Meanwhile, in the crystal spires of the Galactic Council, ancient beings who had controlled galactic politics for millennia watched their carefully constructed order begin to collapse. For thousands of years, they had maintained power by playing different species against each other, using the Vorthak as a convenient threat that kept other civilizations dependent on council protection and mediation. But now, an unknown variable had entered their equation, a species that refused to play by the established rules. The council members argued in emergency sessions, trying to decide how to respond to this unexpected development. Some wanted to negotiate with the humans, while others demanded immediate military action to restore the previous balance of power. What none of them realized was that they had already been infiltrated. Counselor Jin Subin had been working within their organization for decades, carefully building her position while feeding information back to Earth's intelligence services. As she watched the panic spread through the council chambers, Jin allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. The game was changing, and for the first time in galactic history, humanity was about to write the rules. Colonel Kwon Tae-young had never imagined he would be commanding humanity's first offensive operation beyond their solar system. Just 6 months ago, he had been a test pilot, pushing experimental aircraft to their limits in Earth's upper atmosphere. Now he found himself at the helm of a fleet of 60 warships, equipped with reverse-engineered alien technology and carrying the hopes of not just humanity, but dozens of oppressed species across the galaxy. The target was Zirion Prime, a fortress world that had served as a Vorthak military stronghold for 8 centuries. Intelligence provided by freed alien slaves described it as an impregnable bastion, protected by orbital defense platforms and garrisoned by the Empire's most elite troops. The fortress controlled a critical supply route that fed resources to 3 different sectors of Vorthak space, making it a strategic prize that could cripple enemy operations across multiple star systems. Kwon studied the tactical displays in his command ship as the fleet prepared to drop out of hyperspace. The human ships were smaller and less heavily armored than traditional Vorthak vessels, but they were faster and more maneuverable. More importantly, they were crewed by humans who had spent months analyzing every piece of battle footage and tactical data they could get their hands on, learning to exploit every weakness in enemy combat doctrine. The moment of truth came when the human fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, appearing in Zirion Prime's orbital space like avenging angels. The Vorthak defenders had been expecting routine supply ships, not a fleet of enemy warships that materialized without warning in the heart of their supposedly secure system. Kwon's transmission to his pilots was calm, but filled with deadly intent. Every man and woman in his fleet had volunteered for this mission, knowing that they might not return home. They had trained together for months, learning to operate as a single coordinated force that could strike with precision and overwhelming violence when necessary. Lieutenant Lim Yoon-ji was one of humanity's best fighter pilots, a former aerobatic champion who had adapted her skills to the 3-dimensional battlefield of space combat. When the attack began, she dove her sleek interceptor through a storm of alien plasma fire, her ship's enhanced engines allowing her to dance between enemy shots that would have vaporized a less skilled pilot. Major Ahn Byung-ho flew as her wingman, the 2 pilots moving in perfect synchronization as they had practiced countless times in training simulations. Together, they punched through the Vorthak defensive screen and began targeting the orbital platforms that protected the fortress world. Their weapons were human-designed improvements on captured alien technology, firing projectiles that could punch through armor plating that had been considered impenetrable just months before. The battle that followed was unlike anything the Vorthak had experienced in their centuries of conquest. Human pilots flew with a reckless courage that bordered on madness, diving into defensive fire that should have been suicide to deliver precision strikes against critical targets. When their weapons ran low on ammunition, they used their ships as guided missiles, ramming enemy installations and detonating their reactors to cause maximum damage. But it was the orbital bombardment that truly shocked the galaxy. While other species fought with surgical precision, targeting only military objectives while trying to minimize civilian casualties, the humans approached warfare with a terrifying efficiency that erased the distinction between military and civilian. Target Statun Trixala, the Zelani resistance fighter who had helped coordinate intelligence for the human attack, watched the bombardment from a hidden observation post on a nearby moon. He had lived his entire life under Vorthak occupation, had seen his people crushed under alien boots for generations, but even he was stunned by the sheer destructive power that humanity brought to bear against their enemies. The human fleet didn't just attack military installations. They systematically destroyed every piece of infrastructure on the planet's surface, turning factories, spaceports, communication centers, and supply depots into molten craters. The bombardment continued for hours, with human ships taking turns to unleash their weapons, until the entire surface of Zerion Prime glowed with the heat of destruction. The Vorthak garrison's final transmission was filled with panic and disbelief. These enemy soldiers spoke of humans as demons wearing metal shells, creatures that fought with a savagery that defied comprehension. The transmission cut to static as the main fortress complex, a structure that had withstood sieges for 8 centuries, collapsed into rubble under the relentless human assault. When the attack finally ended, Zerion Prime was no longer a fortress world. It was a monument to human fury, a burned and broken planet that would serve as a warning to anyone who dared to threaten Earth or its allies. The Vorthak Empire had lost more than just a strategic stronghold. They had discovered that humanity didn't just fight wars, they waged total destruction against anyone who stood in their way. The news of Zerion Prime's fall spread through Vorthak space like wildfire, carried by the few transport ships that had managed to escape the system before the human fleet arrived. For the first time in their history, the Vorthak Empire faced an enemy that matched their own ruthlessness and exceeded their capacity for organized violence. Across the galaxy, enslaved species whispered new stories about the humans who had come from beyond the known stars. They were no longer just another species fighting for survival. They had become something far more dangerous, liberators who would stop at nothing to free the oppressed and destroy their oppressors. Admiral Jang Young-hoon had led amphibious assaults on 3 different continents during Earth's resource wars, but nothing had prepared him for the liberation of New Altair. The planet had been under Vorthak occupation for over 50 years, its original inhabitants forced into labor camps while their world's resources fed the alien war machine. When Jang's fleet arrived in the system, they expected to face the usual pattern of orbital defenses and ground-based resistance that had characterized every previous battle. Instead, they found a world where the population had risen in coordinated rebellion the moment human ships appeared on their sensors. The Altarians had been secretly preparing for this moment for years, building hidden weapons caches and communication networks while pretending to submit to their alien overlords. When the human fleet began its attack, the planet's enslaved population struck at their guards and overseers with a fury that had been building for decades. The battle for New Altair lasted only 18 hours, but the aftermath would change the course of the entire war. As Jang's Marines secured the planet's capital city, they discovered something that no one had expected to find: massive data storage facilities that contained detailed records of galactic politics going back thousands of years. The archives were hidden deep beneath the planetary government complex, protected by security systems that the Vorthak had never bothered to crack because they assumed the information was worthless historical data. But when human intelligence officers began translating the files, they uncovered evidence of a conspiracy that reached to the highest levels of galactic civilization. Jang spent 3 days reviewing the most damning documents before transmitting his report back to Earth Command. His voice was filled with barely controlled rage as he described what his teams had discovered in the alien archives. The Galactic Council, which had presented itself as a peacekeeping organization dedicated to maintaining stability across the galaxy, had been secretly manipulating conflicts for millennia. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. The Council had not only known about Vorthak expansion into the Outer Rim territories, they had actively encouraged it. Internal communications showed Council members discussing how Vorthak aggression would force independent worlds to seek Council protection, creating new sources of tribute and political influence. Captain Moon Ji-ho received Jang's intelligence report while commanding the dreadnought Inchen's Fury, one of the most powerful warships in humanity's rapidly expanding fleet. Moon had joined the Space Force as a young ensign, working her way up through the ranks during the tense years when Earth was still preparing for the possibility of alien contact. Now she found herself commanding a ship that could destroy entire fleets, fighting in a war that had grown far beyond anything humanity had originally imagined. As Moon read through the translated documents, her professional composure gave way to cold, burning anger. The files detailed how the Council had deliberately allowed 47 different species to fall under Vorthak domination, calculating that enslaved populations would be easier to control than free civilizations. billions of sentient beings, had suffered and died not because of random conquest, but because a group of ancient aliens had decided their deaths were politically convenient. The intelligence reached Earth just as President Seo was addressing an emergency session of the planet's military leadership. The War Cabinet had been meeting almost continuously for weeks as human forces pushed deeper into enemy territory, but the revelation from New Altair changed everything about their strategic planning. President Seo had always prided himself on being a pragmatic leader who could find diplomatic solutions to even the most complex problems. He had spent his political career building coalitions and negotiating compromises that avoided unnecessary conflicts. But the evidence from the alien archives showed that diplomacy had its limits when dealing with enemies who viewed genocide as a tool of statecraft. His words to the assembled military commanders were measured but final. Humanity was no longer fighting a simple war of survival against an aggressive alien empire. They were confronting a galactic system that had been built on the deliberate oppression of weaker species, maintained by ancient powers that saw other civilizations as expendable resources. General Li Hyojung, who had been coordinating the multi-front campaign against Vorthak territories, immediately grasped the implications of the president's announcement. Li had been a career military officer for over 30 years, serving in conflicts across Earth's solar system before the alien war began. She understood that fighting two enemies simultaneously would stretch human resources to their breaking point, but she also knew that leaving the Council intact would mean living under constant threat of manipulation and betrayal. Her response was characteristic of the new humanity that had emerged from the crucible of interstellar war: direct, decisive, and utterly without compromise. Human battle groups were already moving toward Council space, carrying orders to treat the ancient galactic government as hostile targets rather than potential negotiating partners. The galaxy watched in stunned amazement as human fleets struck simultaneously at both Vorthak military installations and Council diplomatic stations. These supposedly primitive beings from an unknown world were challenging the two most powerful entities in known space at the same time, using tactics that defied every conventional understanding of interstellar warfare. What made the human offensive even more remarkable was that they appeared to be winning on both fronts. While one group of human ships methodically dismantled Vorthak fortress worlds, another force was systematically destroying Council infrastructure and capturing the ancient aliens who had manipulated galactic politics for thousands of years. For the first time in recorded history, the established order of galactic civilization was crumbling under assault from a species that refused to accept the limitations that had been imposed on them. Humanity had not just joined the galactic community, they were reshaping it according to their own vision of what civilization should be. The tide had turned, and nothing would ever be the same again. The morning sky above Vorthak Prime had never seen anything like the human armada that emerged from hyperspace as the system's twin suns began to rise. Fleet Admiral Park stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching as over 800 vessels took their positions around the alien homeworld. The fleet represented the combined military might of humanity and its allies, ships from dozens of different species flying under human command in the largest coordinated military operation in galactic history. Park had come a long way from the defensive admiral who had protected Earth during the first alien attack. Now he commanded not just human vessels, but an entire coalition of species that had rallied to humanity's cause. The fleet included everything from massive human dreadnoughts to sleek Rigelian destroyers, from heavily armored Centauri cruisers to the strange crystalline ships of the Vega colonies. Each vessel carried crews that had trained together for months, learning to fight as a unified force despite their different origins and technologies. The target of this unprecedented armada was the most heavily defended world in the galaxy. Vorthak Prime was not just the capital of the alien empire, but a fortress world that had never fallen to enemy attack in over 3,000 years of recorded history. Its orbital defenses included hundreds of battle stations, each one capable of destroying entire fleets. The planet's surface was covered with military installations, weapons factories, and the palaces of the alien nobility who had grown rich from centuries of conquest and oppression. Commander Shin Woo-jin, Park's communications officer, had been monitoring alien transmissions since the fleet arrived in the system. The messages coming from the planet's surface showed a level of panic that Vorthak leadership had never experienced before. For the first time in their history, the aliens who had terrorized the galaxy found themselves facing an enemy that matched their own capacity for organized violence. When the offer to negotiate came from Emperor Thulagon himself, Shin could barely believe what she was hearing. The ruler of the Vorthak Empire, a being who had never shown mercy to any of his victims, was asking to discuss terms of surrender. The same alien who had ordered the enslavement of entire species was now pleading for the chance to bargain for his life and throne. Park's response was immediate and final. He had seen the evidence of Vorthak atrocities on dozens of liberated worlds, had walked through the ruins of civilizations that had been ground under alien boots for generations. There would be no negotiation with creatures who had built their empire on the bones of their victims. The only acceptable outcome was complete and unconditional surrender. The battle for Vorthak Prime became a legend that would be told across the galaxy for generations to come. The fighting lasted 3 days and 3 nights, with human forces pushing deeper into the planet's defenses, while orbital bombardments turned the sky into a constant display of explosions and energy beams. The Vorthak defenders fought with the desperation of beings who knew their entire civilization was at stake, but they had never faced enemies who could match their own ruthlessness. Major Im So-Ra led the final assault on the Imperial Palace, a massive structure that had stood at the center of Vorthak power for millennia. She had been a Marine officer during the defense of Earth, one of the soldiers who had fought hand-to-hand with alien boarding parties in the corridors of human ships. Now she found herself leading a mixed force of human Marines and alien warriors. Through the palace halls where emperors had planned the conquest of the galaxy, Colonel Ryu Jae-sung commanded the simultaneous assault on the orbital stations that protected the planet. His forces included pilots and soldiers from 30 different species, all fighting under human tactical doctrine and unified command. The diversity of the coalition was remarkable. Zilani miners who had learned to use mining equipment as weapons, Rigelian navigators who had become expert fighter pilots, and Centauri refugees who fought with the fury of beings who had lost their homeworlds to Vorthak aggression. The moment that changed galactic history came when Emperor Thulagon's personal guard, the elite warriors who had never known defeat, finally laid down their weapons in the ruins of the throne room. These aliens had been bred for warfare, genetically enhanced to be perfect soldiers, but even they recognized that continuing to fight would only lead to more pointless death. Lieutenant Nam Min-ki, a young officer who had enlisted in Earth's Space Force just 2 years earlier, was given the honor of planting humanity's flag beside the destroyed throne. The blue and white banner of Earth fluttered in the alien wind, marking the end of an empire that had seemed invincible for thousands of years. The collapse of the Vorthak Empire sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. Species that had lived in fear for generations suddenly found themselves free from the threat that had dominated their existence. Worlds that had been enslaved for centuries began the long process of rebuilding their civilizations, while others reached out to the human coalition seeking membership in the new galactic order. What made the victory even more remarkable was the speed with which it had been achieved. The empire that had taken millennia to build had been destroyed in just 18 months of human warfare. The galaxy had learned that when humanity committed to a cause, they brought a level of organization, determination, and sheer destructive capability that could reshape the political landscape of entire star systems. The war was over, but the real work of building a new galactic civilization was just beginning. President Seo walked slowly through the magnificent crystal chambers that had once housed the Galactic Council, his footsteps echoing in the vast halls where galactic politics had been controlled for thousands of years. The towering spires of translucent material caught the light from distant stars, creating rainbow patterns that danced across the walls and floors. These same chambers had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations, had been the stage for diplomatic negotiations that shaped the destiny of entire species. Now they would serve a very different purpose. Instead of housing the secretive meetings of ancient aliens, who manipulated galactic affairs from the shadows, these crystal halls would become the headquarters of something unprecedented in galactic history. A confederation built on the radical, human concepts of voluntary membership and democratic representation. The assembly hall was filled with representatives from 47 different worlds, species that had been liberated from Vorthak oppression during the 18-month war that had changed everything. Some were humanoid in appearance, while others were so alien that special translation equipment was needed just to communicate with them. But despite their physical differences, they all shared something that had been rare in the galaxy for millennia: hope for a future where their civilizations could develop without fear of conquest or manipulation. President Seo had spent weeks preparing for this moment, working with teams of translators and cultural experts to craft a speech that would resonate with beings from dozens of different worlds and belief systems. As he looked out at the assembled representatives, he saw not just alien faces, but potential partners in building something better than what had come before. His opening words were carefully chosen to address the fears that many of the liberated species still carried. For generations, they had lived under the rule of beings who claimed to know what was best for them, who had imposed their will through superior technology and military force. Now they faced humans who possessed even greater military power, and many wondered if they had simply traded one set of masters for another. Seo's declaration was simple but revolutionary. Humanity had not fought this war to build an empire or to become the new rulers of the galaxy. They had fought to establish the principle that every intelligent species had the right to determine its own destiny, free from external domination or manipulation. The confederation he was proposing would exist solely to protect that freedom, not to exploit it. Ambassador Park So-young stepped forward to present the charter that would govern this new galactic organization. Park had been a career diplomat before the war began, specializing in international law and treaty negotiations. Now she found herself helping to write the founding documents of an interstellar government based on principles that most galactic civilizations had never even considered. The charter she presented was unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Instead of the rigid hierarchy that had characterized the old Galactic Council, where ancient species held permanent seats and made decisions for younger civilizations, the Terran Confederation offered equal representation to all member worlds. Regardless of their technological level or military power, membership was entirely voluntary, and any world could withdraw from the Confederation at any time without penalty. Captain Ko Eun-soo, who had earned promotion to admiral during the final battles of the war, outlined the military structure that would protect this new political order. Her fleet would not be used to impose human will on unwilling populations or to expand human territory through conquest. Instead, it would serve as a shield for any member world that faced external aggression or internal oppression. The defense protocols Ko described were based on the simple principle that had guided human military thinking throughout the war. An attack on any member of the international community was an attack on all of them. This mutual defense agreement meant that no single world would ever again face the overwhelming military superiority that had allowed empires like the Vorthak to conquer their neighbors with impunity. Dr. Yoon Hye-jin, who had started the war as a xenobiologist studying alien wreckage and had ended it as the director of interspecies relations, watched the proceedings with quiet satisfaction. Around the assembly hall, she could see representatives from species that had been bitter, enemies just months before now working together to solve common problems. Former Vorthak client species sat beside the aliens they had helped oppress, united by their shared desire to build something better than the cycle of conquest and revenge that had dominated galactic history. The transformation was remarkable and unprecedented. Humanity had not just won a military victory, they had fundamentally changed how the galaxy thought about power, governance, and the relationship between different civilizations. The old assumption that stronger species had the right to dominate weaker ones had been shattered by human military might, but more importantly, it had been replaced by a new vision of what interstellar civilization could become. As the first ships of the Confederation fleet prepared to launch from Earth's orbital shipyards, carrying mixed crews from dozens of different worlds. The galaxy itself seemed to pause in anticipation. These vessels would not be instruments of conquest, but ambassadors of a new way of thinking about power and responsibility on an interstellar scale. The age of human expansion was beginning, but it would be an expansion of ideas rather than territory, of principles rather than military dominance. The galaxy had indeed trembled when humanity joined the battle, but what had started as fear of human weapons had transformed into hope for human vision of what civilization could become when built. On freedom rather than oppression.